Our next speaker is, I'm not even sure how to describe him. I'll let him speak for himself. But Jack Andraka is a high school junior, created a paper sensor that detects pancreatic, ovarian, and lung cancer in 5 minutes for as little as 3 cents. And he found that with his start tooling around on the internet. Jack Andraka.
So my story really began when I was 13, when a close family friend who was like an uncle to me actually passed away from pancreatic cancer. And when the disease hit so close to home, I knew I needed to learn more. So I went online to find answers. And using just Google and Wikipedia, I found a variety of statistics on the cancer, but what I had found really shocked me. You see, over 85% of all of these pancreatic cancers are diagnosed late, when someone has less than a 2% chance of survival. And upon digging deeper, I found out the reason for this was that we currently employ a 6-year-old technique to detect the cancer. I mean, that's older than my dad. But also, it costs $800 per test and is grossly inaccurate, missing 30% of all cancers. Your doctor would have to be ridiculously suspicious that you have the cancer in order to give you this test. However, undeterred due to my teenage optimism, or how some people label it, complete and utter ignorance of the entire field, I decided I was going to change cancer diagnostics armed with little more than 9th grade biology. And so I went back online, and I found what a sensor for pancreatic cancer would really have to look like in order to be effective. It would have to be inexpensive. It's going to be inexpensive, rapid, simple, sensitive, selective, and minimally invasive. And I was pretty sure I could do this, however, I wasn't exactly sure how, so I went back to Google, and I was just like, so how am I going to detect the cancer? Google knows everything, right? So tell me how I'm going to do this. And unfortunately, it didn't just spit out the answer. However, I found out that when we're looking for these cancers, the reason why we haven't updated in 6 decades is because when we're looking for them, we're looking at your bloodstream, particularly for these variations in protein levels there. And while it sounds very straightforward, it's anything but, because you have liters and liters of blood in your bloodstream, and this is already abundant with thousands and thousands of proteins. And you're looking for this tiny variation, this tiny amount of protein, so it's next to impossible. It's like trying to find a needle in a stack of nearly identical needles. However, I was going to keep pushing, and eventually I found a database of over 8,000 proteins that are found in your bloodstream when you have pancreatic cancer. And this is after 3 months of just beating my head against the computer trying to find this. And then I actually had to go through all 8,000. I mean, what other solution could there be? Kind of felt like I was playing that game Pokemon. Instead of gotta catch them all, you gotta research every single protein, and it was much less fun as well. So then I just plugged and chugged. It was my summer break. I had nothing else to do, so I locked myself in my room and just plugged out all 8,000 proteins. And it made for some interesting back-to-school essays, such as, oh, Jack, what did you do? I researched 8,000 proteins, while my classmates had more standard responses like, I went to Yellowstone Park. However, on the 4,000th try, I finally found one protein that could potentially serve as an indicator for pancreatic cancer. And the name of this protein is called mesothelin. And it's just your ordinary run-of-the-mill type protein, unless, of course, you have pancreatic, ovarian, and lung cancer, in which case it's found at these very high levels in your bloodstream. But the key is that it's found in the earliest stages of the disease, when someone has close to 100% chance of survival. So now that I'd identified a protein that could potentially serve as an indicator for the cancer, I then shifted my focus to actually detecting that protein and thus the presence of the cancer. And on this long, epic saga that was me finding this cancer test, I had a few key epiphany moments, and one of them came in the most unlikely places. High school biology class, the absolute stifler of innovation. Particularly with my biology teacher, we did not get along at all. So one day, it escalated to the point where I decided to rebel against my teacher like any high schooler would. by bringing in an article on single-walled carbon nanotubes to read, some actual science here. And single-walled carbon nanotubes are these long, thin tubes of carbon that are an atom thick, and they're 1/50,000th the diameter of your hair. So they're extremely, extremely small. But they have these amazing properties. They're kind of like the superheroes of material science. So I was reading about all these different properties, feeling really suave, having it like tucked into my notebook. It was about as James Bond as I got back then. And then I was being droned to sleep by my biology teacher lecturing on antibodies. And antibodies are this certain class of molecules that only react with one specific protein, in this case, that cancer biomarker that I was using. And I was just sitting there when all of a sudden it hit me. You could combine these two concepts. You see, in the biosensor, what you really want is you want it to be both selective, meaning it only detects that one disease, as well as sensitive, such that it picks up all of those diseases. Now, the antibodies here, those would provide the selectivity, meaning they would only react towards that cancer, while the carbon nanotubes and their amazing properties would provide the sensitivity such that I could detect all of the cancers. And this took the form of me just kind of mashing the two together into a network. You take these antibodies and you weave them into this network of nanotubes such that you have a network that only reacts with one specific protein. But also, due to the properties of these nanotubes, it'll actually change how electricity flows through it, and thus I can measure this change using just an ohmmeter I swiped from my dad's garage and detect pancreatic cancer. And just as soon as I had this epiphany, I realized, hey, I'm going to probably need to support these nanotube layers because, you know, carbon nanotube networks, they're pretty flimsy stuff. It's kind of like a bunch of soot. And so I chose to use paper. And making a paper sensor for pancreatic cancer is about as simple as making chocolate chip cookies, which I love. I mean, if I do bad on a test, you'd better hide those chocolate chip cookies. Or the ice cream, depending on how bad my test score was. And all you do is you take some water, you pour in some nanotubes, add some antibodies, mix it up, take some paper, dip it, dry it, and then you can detect cancer. And then I realized I'm in biology class, and then I looked up and like, oh, my biology teacher, she looks awful mad. I wonder why she's so mad. She storms up to me all red in the face and snatches this scientific article and is like, what is this doing in my class, this actual science? At least that's kind of what I interpreted her saying. And after a 30-minute lecture on respecting myself and others, I finally got my article back. And then I could continue researching this promising idea I had just had. And all of a sudden, I realized I'm going to need a lab because you can't do cancer research on your kitchen countertop. I mean, me and my brother had done some pretty crazy stuff in our house prior to this. We mixed up high-grade explosives down in our basement, as well as culturing cholera and E. coli where we make sandwiches. Luckily, there wasn't like an outbreak or something. We even ordered uranium from a sketchy Russian website, and that landed us on the FBI watch list. Well, my mom, because we used her credit card. But you really can't blame us. I mean, it was 50% off, so. However, I was going to need a lab. Cancer research wasn't in the family budget, unfortunately. So I contacted 200 different professors at Johns Hopkins University and the National Institutes of Health asking, can I come into your lab? And I typed out this big, gargantuan 32-page behemoth of a document outlining every little bit of my procedure. And I was going to be really surprised if anyone actually read that. I most certainly would not have. I mean, 32 pages was awfully overkill in my opinion, but in retrospect. However, I emailed it out to 200 professors, and I was sitting back waiting for all these positive email support in, waiting for me to be like posted on Time magazine, boy, genius saves the world. And then reality took hold. I got 199 rejections. And I realized professors aren't nearly as nice as those smiling, glowing profile pictures make them seem. They can actually be quite harsh sometimes and go through each line of your procedure saying why it was wrong. And I don't know where they got that time. Maybe making fun of 16-year-olds hobby is like a hobby of theirs. However, Eventually, I got one positive email from Dr. Andraka at Johns Hopkins University. And I go in for this big interview, and I suppose sweatpants and a hoodie wasn't the best interview attire, but I was coming from high school, and I didn't really feel like dressing up that day. So I go in for this big interview expecting like standard interview questions I was used to, like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite class? No, unfortunately, this guy had his PhD in cancer biology, unlike my parents, who I could bamboozle and say anything, and they just nod their head understandingly, like, yes, of course, Jack. However, unfortunately, I eventually got into this interview, and an hour later, I stumbled out, my brain kind of on fire, because Dr. Maitra decided it would be nice to stick 28 PhDs plus myself and Jack in a 9-foot by 9-foot room. I mean, we probably set a Guinness World Book of Records right there. However, after an hour-long interrogation, I finally landed the lab space I needed. And I finally began this long journey in the lab that was quite ill-fated at some points because I screwed up every imaginable procedure in that lab. I mean, first day, culture some cancer cells, Jack. It seemed pretty easy. I sneezed in my cancer cell flask. And I thought, cancer cells, they're pretty hard to kill off. They have like an immune system, right? No, they're like tentacles growing out the next day, and I kind of just like hid that away. And over the next 3 months, I committed cellular genocide on numerous occasions. I would cook them in my incubator. I also tripped once and fell on them. And then finally, I collected enough cell media that I could put for the next part of my procedure. I put it in my centrifuge, super happy. It turns out when the centrifuge turned sideways, the beaker hit against the middle, and there was a fountain of cell media going everywhere. It was totally worth it, in my opinion. My lab partner, not so much. He just kind of like stared at me like, what are you doing, Jack? However, after 7 months of screwing up every possible scientific procedure, I finally ended up with one small paper sensor that costs 3 cents and takes 5 minutes to run. This makes it 168 times faster, over 26,000 times less expensive, and over 400 times more sensitive than our current methods of detection. But also, the coolest part of it is that I can detect the cancer in the earliest stage, when someone has close to 100% chance of survival. And also, it's so far over 90% accuracy at detecting the cancer. So in the next 2 to 5 years, this patent-pending sensor could potentially lift the once dismal pancreatic cancer survival rates from 5.5% to close to 100%. And it would do similar for ovarian and lung cancer. But by switching out that antibody, you can detect an entirely different protein, meaning an entirely different disease. Range from Alzheimer's to other forms of cancer, even HIV, AIDS, and heart disease, the possibilities are literally endless. And throughout this journey, I faced numerous difficulties, some from my parents. I mean, they were like, Jack, you're 14, you can't do cancer research. And the fact that I was 14 at the time also made me working in a lab for pay child slavery. So, however, I got over that by kind of taking this back door by saying I was a volunteer who was conveniently placed in the right lab. But eventually, I got into the lab, and I overcame all these different difficulties. However, the largest difficulty I faced on this entire journey was that of scientific paywalls. You see, when you want to read a scientific article, that means you have to cough up $35. And because of this cost, my research becomes exponentially more expensive. I mean, when you need about 200 articles to really get a solid basis of the field, that's several $1,000s, and not many kids have that to shell out. I eventually bothered my parents over the course of a few years to get me all of those articles for like Christmas and stuff. However, not a lot of people have that. And while we have all these big STEM initiatives asking more kids to get interested in science, we're sending kind of a mixed message when a Katy Perry single costs 99 cents, but a seminal science article costs $35. I mean, which are you going to choose there if you're a teenager? And this isn't just a problem for 15-year-old cancer researchers. This is a problem for everyone. You see, recently, Harvard University released a statement saying that continuing subscriptions to these scientific journals, especially electronic ones that were key providers, cannot be sustained because it's just financially untenable. It's just too expensive. Now, what does it say about the world of academic publishing, the flow of information, and the accessibility of knowledge when Harvard University, the richest academic institution in the world can't afford to continue paying for its subscriptions. By having these paywalls, we've instituted this very rigid class system, this hierarchy almost when it comes to scientific knowledge and knowledge in general. Because you see, we have the knowledge elite, Harvard, big universities, big corporate labs, those types of people that can have these big endowments that can pay for these journal articles. But there's even a stratification here because you see state universities such as University of Maryland and places like that probably don't have the same amount of money as these private institutions. So we're even creating a stratification there. But then we have the knowledge middle class, people like you and me. We can go on the internet, we can access the 10% of articles that are open access, free to the public, and then also we might buy a few articles. But then there's the knowledge underclass, those that don't have any access to the internet whatsoever and thus are completely incapable of really getting access to this scientific knowledge. So we're living in a knowledge aristocracy where 0.008% of the world's population, that's how many people are able to read these scientific journals. Then we have 80% of the world's population, 5.5 billion people, who can't access these articles whatsoever. So it's like essentially taking 80 people off the street of New York City and saying, you guys are the only ones who can read scientific journals. Everyone else sucks to be you. And imagine, however, if instead we could live in a knowledge democracy, where regardless of whether you're from Cambodia to China, Malaysia to Mexico, whether you're a billionaire living on less than $1 a day, you'd have the exact same access to scientific information. Because science isn't a luxury, and knowledge should not be a commodity. It should be a basic human right. Because the minds of the people must be free, and that means the minds of everyone, not the minds of the select few who can afford these articles. And on top of this, I think there's a second issue, because this is one of the main issues that we face in getting kids interested in STEM education and education in general, is that they really are we have really made a fundamental barrier between kids and the professional world, saying, no, you aren't advanced enough for that stuff, or no, you can't afford that yet. But then there's the second part where students don't even have a voice in their education, where essentially we have completely removed those who are being impacted by education decisions from the decision-making process, because kids are the direct victims or benefactors of whatever decision in education policy we make. And so why shouldn't they be included on that education decision? So between these two things, I think that we can substantially increase the power of education for getting kids interested in different STEM education opportunities or education in general, and make the world hopefully a better and happier place. And I believe that we can do this because think, if a 15-year-old who didn't quite know what a pancreas was could find a new way to detect pancreatic cancer, just imagine what we all can do together. Thank you.
We have some time for some questions for Jack. Beth?
I'm back.
Kristen, have you got Beth?
So I want to hear what's on the next page. So you invented this thing, so when is it getting out there?
So unfortunately, just because of the regulatory so right now I have the international patent on the technology, and I'm going to talk to several large biotech companies. However, the problem is that due to the FDA and other regulatory processes, it's going to be at least 5 to 10 years before this can get on the market.
Just one small bit of advice. Usually a lot of medical companies go to Europe before they come to the United States. If somebody hasn't told you that yet, it's worth looking into. It's a lot shorter.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
So, Jack, this is really impressive. I know medical students that don't even know what the pancreas is yet, and you've already mastered techniques at looking at cancer, which is phenomenal. But I'm curious, who were the mentors? Who were the people that picked you up along the way? Were they people in your school? Were they the teachers that pointed you? Who kind of helped give you that little bit of push that helped you get where you are?
So I would really say, first off, after I finally convinced my parents I wanted to do cancer research, and they were a bit dubious at first, however, finally I got them on board. They would drive me to the lab every single day after school, and my mom would sometimes wait there until 2 o'clock in the morning when I got out, because you never know when Jack is going to get out of the lab. So she read a lot of books while I was in the lab. And then also my brother was also a huge help in this entire process because, unfortunately, I don't grasp physics and chemistry as well as he does. And so whenever I would have a question on that, I would go to him, and he would explain to me all the different electrical and chemical properties of stuff, whereas I can explain to him medicine and stuff. I'm a bio kid, and he does physics. And then last off is my lab mentor, Dr. Maitra. He also was a huge help on this entire process, and he's the best lab mentor ever. Unfortunately, he moved down to MD Anderson, though, so I had to move to another lab, which was sad.
Questions?
Sorry. I was wondering, through the process, how much the incentive was this death in your family, and how much was just your pure intellectual curiosity?
So before this project, I was actually way into environmental sciences. I'm kind of getting back into that right now. Just because I go kayaking and mountain biking, so I always see the environment. However, when this happened, I got really turned into the medical field. And so the death of a close family friend was actually really responsible for me getting into the field. And in order to not be discouraged when I was in the lab, I would always remember who I was helping because 100 people die of pancreatic cancer every single day. So I'd think, how am I going to help save 100 lives today when I go into the lab? And that's how I got through the dreaded Western blot procedure, which was awful.
Am I the only? My father died of pancreatic cancer about 30 years ago. And I've known people who have had pancreatic cancer in recent years, and the protocols seem just about the same, and the life expectancy pretty much the same. So I'm wondering if, have you gone to the foundations that are funding this, like Lustgarten and others, or are you looking at, what are you looking at now, I guess, is what, the FDA and all of those approvals are one thing, but like how are you going to move this forward?
So unfortunately, as a high school kid, I don't have as much time or resources as I'd like. I have homework, and then also there's prom, unfortunately. However, one thing is that, unfortunately, because of that, and also just because of schoolwork and travel and stuff, I don't have as much time in the lab as I'd like. So what I really would like to do is really hand this off to a biotech company who'd be able to put all of their time into it and be able to make sure that makes it to the market. Because right now, all I want is to make this get to the market as soon as possible.
So you've contrasted the experience of sitting in a high school bio class and then sitting with a mentor in a lab, working on a project that you're really passionate about. I'm curious, as somebody, we live in a society that essentially says, before you finish high school, we don't give you a choice in what you specialize in. Like, you do have to master certain standards of English and math, et cetera. Would you want to have that same model for every class? Or would you prefer to be able to use that sort of mentor lab model for just that thing you're passionate about and still just have sort of like the classroom experience for English? Or do you also want to like work at the SCIM to learn that?
So especially in science classes, I definitely agree that there should be a lot more hands-on activities and individually driven investigations, simply because that's how you learn science. You don't learn science from a textbook, you learn science by doing it. And so I think that by incorporating more hands-on activities, particularly where you come up with a project idea and are able to do it, I think that would probably teach science a lot more effectively than we are currently right now. And then second off, for other classes, I mean, I must admit I'm not a guru for English or history, so being in the traditional classroom setting can help me there. However, also just incorporating more individually driven projects also would probably be a better learning experience for me there, because that's, I guess, how I learn, but I'm not sure. I can't speak for all students.
Jack, what was the reaction of your friends and your peers, your fellow students at your school? Was it admiration, awe, shock, indifference? And do you think that what you accomplished, even though it was outside of school, do you think it had any impact on their own thoughts and approaches on solving problems?
So 6th through 8th grade, when I first got into science and would do science fairs, that was like my life. I actually got teased a lot and bullied a lot for doing science. And I remember oftentimes having to do the stereotypical eat in the bathroom, like they get your like tray and you eat in the bathroom stall. Yeah, middle school isn't fun. However, in high school, no one really knew that I did scientific research until I won the Intel International Science and Engineering Festival or Fair. And after that, I suppose since I go to a STEM school, the STEM kids were a lot more accepting. However, also I go to the STEM program is located in an interesting school where less than 50% of people graduate in like inner city Baltimore, and we're more well known for gang shootings and stabbings than scientific research. So there's kind of like this divide between the STEM students and the main student body of the main student body just not really knowing or caring about that, while the STEM student body is like, oh, that's pretty cool.
I think we have time for, one more question.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, as we're talking about play and playful learning, and if you can, I'm right here. If you can talk for a minute about any memories that you had from your childhood, which wasn't that long ago, but just kind of what kind of experiences did you have as a child that kind of led to your more, open, problem-solving kind of approach?
So back in my day, no, but my entire family is really interested in science. I mean, it kind of runs in the gene. All of my extended family is scientists or engineers. But my parents really got me into science by just doing these really rudimentary science experiments, like the classic Coke and Mentos volcano, or also we did a few more dangerous ones, like stuffing. You take a Gatorade bottle and you put hydrochloric acid in it, and then you roll up little balls of aluminum and quickly close it, and it becomes like an air grenade thing that spews hydrochloric acid everywhere. It was an interesting experience. However, also we did bioluminescent bacteria, where you culture the glowing bacteria, and you could read by those things. They're really bright. You guys should all try it. It's super fun. But just those really, they might seem like kiddish, but they're really, really fun and really interesting to a younger kid. And I mean, that's what really enthralled me about science, is that, hey, I can discover something that no one has ever discovered before, and this is super cool. So